5 years had passed since the disgraceful separation that had shattered not only two hearts, but also the delicate political balance between the magical races of Arelturan. Syrian of the blood-carrier lineage stood at the tall windows of his tower sanctuary, watching the morning mist rise from the enchanted forests below. His fingers traced the cold glass as he held the ornate invitation that had arrived with the dawn courier. The parchment bore the seal of the Grand Guild, its golden ink shimmering with residual magic. The crystal of Echo's ceremony, a ritualistic spectacle broadcast through the mirrors of the people across the entire continent. Every magical being would witness the trials, the pairings, the intimate revelations that would unfold within the Temple of Illusions. For Syrian, this invitation represented more than just participation in an ancient ceremony. It was a chance at political rehabilitation, a path back to respectability after the scandal that had driven him into exile. As an Omega mage from one of the most prestigious bloodlines, Syrian had once been destined for greatness. His family's influence had stretched across multiple clans, their magical prowess legendary among the blood carriers. But all of that had crumbled 5 years ago when Ashta, the battle demon who had been his bonded partner, had abandoned him for a mission with the Desert Clan. The public humiliation had been devastating. An Omega without his alpha, a mage without his warrior counterpart, Syrian had become a symbol of failure and instability. The magical community thrived on partnerships, on the delicate balance between complementary powers. Omega mages like Syrian possessed incredible ability to channel and manipulate magical energies, but they required the grounding presence of a strong alpha to maintain stability. When Ashta had left, claiming duty to his clan superseded personal bonds, Syrian had not only lost his partner but also his standing in society. The whispers had followed him everywhere, speaking of his inadequacy, his inability to hold the interest of his demon lover. But now the Crystal of Echoes offered redemption. The ceremony was designed to create new partnerships, to forge bonds between compatible magical beings. If Syrian could prove himself worthy of a strong alpha, if he could demonstrate his value as a partner and a mage, perhaps he could reclaim his place in the world. What Syrian didn't know was that the Grand Guild had their own plans for the ceremony. They had invited participants from across the continent, including several surprise additions to the compatibility testing. Among these secret participants was Ashta himself, the very demon who had shattered Syrian's heart and reputation 5 years earlier. The Temple of Illusions stood at the heart of the continent, a massive structure that existed partially in the physical realm and partially in the realm of dreams and memories. Its walls were crafted from crystallized moonlight, and its chambers could recreate any environment, any memory, any scenario that the temple's magic deemed necessary for the trials ahead. As participants began to arrive, the temple's ancient consciousness stirred, reading their hearts and minds to prepare the perfect testing grounds. Syrian arrived on the day of the ceremony dressed in the traditional robes of his lineage. The deep blue fabric was embroidered with silver threads that pulsed with his magical energy, marking him as a mage of considerable power despite his social disgrace. His auburn hair was bound back with a circlet of white gold, and his green eyes held a determination that had been forged in years of isolation and self-doubt. The temple's great hall was filled with potential participants, a diverse gathering of magical beings from across the continent. Syrian recognized representatives from the wolf clans, the elemental courts, the shadow dancers, and dozens of other magical societies. The air hummed with power and anticipation as the ceremony's overseers prepared to begin the first phase of the trials. It was then that Syrian saw him. Ashta stood on the far side of the hall, his imposing figure immediately recognizable even after 5 years of separation. The demon had grown even more magnificent in their time apart, his dark hair now touched with silver at the temples, his powerful frame clothed in the black leather armor of his clan. His eyes, those burning amber orbs that had once gazed upon Syrian with such tenderness, now swept the room with cold calculation. The shock of seeing his former partner hit Syrian like a physical blow. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the careful composure he had maintained for years threatened to crumble. Ashta's presence here could only mean one thing. The guild had orchestrated this reunion, perhaps as part of their political machinations or perhaps simply for the entertainment value of the drama that would surely unfold. The ceremony began with the sorting of souls, a ritual that would determine which participants would be paired for the trials ahead. The temple's magic reached out to touch each being present, reading their deepest desires, their hidden fears, their secret longings. Syrian felt the mystical tendrils probe his mind, and he tried desperately to shield his thoughts from the memories of Ashta that threatened to overwhelm him. But the temple's magic was ancient and powerful, and it saw through his defenses with ease. It read the love that still burned in his heart, the pain that had never fully healed, the desperate hope that perhaps, somehow, things could be different this time. And across the hall, it touched Ashta's mind as well, discovering the demon's own carefully buried emotions, the regret that had eaten at him for 5 years, the love that he had tried to deny but could never truly escape. The pairing ritual began with a display of lights that danced across the ceiling of the great hall. Each beam of light represented a potential partnership, and as the magic worked, the beams began to connect participants in patterns that spoke of compatibility, of shared destiny, of bonds that transcended the mundane world. Syrian watched with growing dread as his own light, a soft silver glow that emanated from his chest, began to move across the room. He tried to will it toward one of the other participants, perhaps the elegant Wolf Clan Alpha who had been watching him with interest, or the powerful fire elemental whose flames danced in harmony with natural magic. But the temple's will was not to be denied. His light moved inexorably toward Ashta, and the demon's own dark red glow rose to meet it. When the two lights touched, the entire hall erupted in a shower of sparks. The magic of their connection was so powerful that it briefly overwhelmed the temple's containment spells, sending waves of energy rippling through the assembled crowd. Several participants gasped or stepped back, and even the ceremony's overseers looked surprised by the intensity of the reaction. Syrian and Ashta stood frozen as their lights merged, creating a spiral of silver and red that pulsed with the rhythm of their combined heartbeats. The temple's magic had made its choice, and there was no arguing with destiny. They would be partners for the trials ahead, forced to work together, to face their past, to confront the feelings they had both tried so hard to bury. The first trial would take place in the Chamber of Memories, where the temple would recreate environments from the participants' past to test their compatibility and resolve. As Syrian and Ashta were led toward the chamber, neither spoke. The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of anger, longing, and barely controlled emotion that seemed to charge the very air around them. The Chamber of Memories was a vast space filled with swirling mists that could solidify into any form the temple's magic desired. As Syrian and Ashta entered, the mists began to take shape around them, forming the familiar walls and furnishings of the home they had once shared. Every detail was perfect, from the worn leather chairs by the fireplace to the herb garden visible through the windows, from the books scattered across the desk to the half-finished tapestry that still hung on the loom. This had been their sanctuary, the place where they had built their life together before duty and fear had torn them apart. Seeing it recreated in such perfect detail was almost unbearable. Syrian's eyes filled with tears he refused to shed, while Ashta's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The trial began with a simple challenge. They were required to work together to create a unity potion, a magical brew that would demonstrate their compatibility as partners. The ingredients were laid out on the familiar kitchen table, and the recipe was one they had performed countless times in the past. But instead of the love and harmony that had once characterized their magical workings, the air between them crackled with tension and unresolved conflict. Syrian began the preparation with mechanical precision, his movements sharp and controlled. He crushed the moonflower petals with perhaps more force than necessary, sending their silvery dust swirling through the air. Ashta watched him for a moment, then reached for the vial of starlight essence, his fingers brushing against Syrian's as he did so. The contact was electric, sending a jolt of familiar sensation through both of them. Syrian jerked his hand away as if burned, spilling some of the precious ingredients in the process. Ashta's amber eyes flashed with something that might have been regret or frustration, and he steadied the vial with careful hands. They worked in tense silence, each aware of the thousands of eyes watching them through the temple's magical broadcast. The mirrors of the people were transmitting every moment of their reunion to magical communities across the continent, and Syrian could feel the weight of their scrutiny. Some would be hoping for reconciliation, others would be betting on spectacular failure, and still others would simply be enjoying the drama of watching two former lovers navigate the minefield of their shared past. The potion required precise timing and perfect harmony between the magical energies of both partners. Syrian's silver light needed to blend seamlessly with Ashta's red flame, creating the golden glow that would indicate successful completion. But their emotions were too raw, too chaotic, for such delicate work. The first attempt resulted in a violent explosion that filled the chamber with acrid smoke and left both of them coughing and singed. The second attempt was little better. Syrian's magic was erratic, fluctuating with his emotional state, while Ashta's power was too controlled, too carefully contained. They couldn't find the balance they had once shared, the perfect synchronization that had made them such a formidable team. The overseers watched with interest as the two struggled, making notes on their clipboards and whispering among themselves. It was during the third attempt that the facade began to crack. Syrian's frustration boiled over, and he slammed his hands down on the table with enough force to rattle the glassware. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with 5 years of pent-up anger and pain. "This is impossible," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "We can't work together anymore. Too much has changed. Too much has been broken." Ashta's response was equally heated, his own carefully maintained control beginning to slip. "Nothing has changed, Syrian. You're still the same stubborn, proud Omega who refuses to accept help when it's offered. You're still so convinced that you can handle everything alone that you push away anyone who tries to get close." The accusation hit home, and Syrian's green eyes blazed with fury. "I push people away? That's rich. Coming from the demon who abandoned me for a mission he claimed was more important than our bond. You left, Ashta. You chose duty over love, and now you have the audacity to blame me for the consequences." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and it seemed to pierce through Ashta's defenses. The demon's expression softened slightly, and he took a step toward his former partner. "Syrian, you don't understand. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to. There were things you didn't know, circumstances that—" "Stop!" Syrian held up a hand, his voice shaking with emotion. "Just stop. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear about how duty called and you had no choice. You made your choice, and I've spent 5 years living with the consequences." The chamber fell silent except for the soft bubbling of the failed potion attempts. The magical audience beyond the mirrors watched in fascination as the two former lovers aired their grievances, their private pain made public for the entertainment of the masses. But for Syrian and Ashta, in that moment, the outside world had ceased to exist. They were alone with their memories, their regrets, and the love that neither had been able to fully extinguish. Ashta's voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, more vulnerable than it had been in years. "I never stopped loving you, Syrian. Not for a single day. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I truly believed it was the only way to protect you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Syrian's anger wavered, replaced by a confusion that was almost as painful as the rage had been. "Protect me from what? From the Desert Clan? From your mission? From yourself? From the curse?" Ashta said simply, and the weight of revelation settled over the chamber like a shroud. "From the curse that falls on every demon who dares to love an Omega. From the visions that showed me your death over and over again until I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I left because staying meant watching you die, and I couldn't bear that." The confession hit Syrian like a physical blow. Curse. All this time, he had believed that Ashta had simply grown tired of him, that the demon's love had faded or been overshadowed by ambition. But if there was a curse, if Ashta had been tormented by visions of his death, then everything he had believed about their separation was wrong. "You never told me," Syrian whispered, his voice barely audible. "You never said anything about a curse. You just left. How could I tell you? Ashta's own voice was raw with emotion. How could I explain that loving you was literally killing me? That every moment we spent together brought me closer to madness? I thought if I left, if I stayed away, the visions would stop and you would be safe. The potion ingredients lay forgotten on the table as the two men faced each other across the space that had once been their shared home. The temple's magic continued to swirl around them, reading their emotions, their memories, their deepest truths. And in that swirling energy, something began to shift. The anger that had sustained Syrian for 5 years began to crack, revealing the love that had never truly died beneath. Did they stop? He asked quietly. The visions. Ashta's silence was answer enough. The demon's amber eyes were haunted, speaking of sleepless nights and tormented dreams that had followed him even into exile. No, he admitted finally. They never stopped. Distance didn't matter. Time didn't matter. I still see you die, Syrian. I still wake up screaming your name. The revelation broke something inside Syrian's chest, a dam that had been holding back 5 years of grief and longing. He took a step toward Ashta, then another until they were standing close enough to touch. Up close, he could see the lines that pain had carved around the demon's eyes, the exhaustion that spoke of years of sleepless nights and endless worry. We're both fools, Syrian said softly, his hand rising to touch Ashta's face. The demon leaned into the contact with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. You for believing that leaving would solve anything, and me for never trying to understand why you left. The simple touch seemed to unlock something in the magic around them. Their combined energies, which had been chaotic and conflicted, began to settle into a more harmonious pattern. The unity potion on the table began to glow softly, responding to the emotional connection that was reforming between them. But their moment of reconciliation was interrupted by the arrival of another participant. The chamber door opened to admit a tall, elegant figure dressed in the traditional garb of the wolf clans. This was Lauren of the Pale Fang clan, and his presence added a new dimension of complexity to the already charged atmosphere. Lauren was everything that Syrian had once thought he wanted in a partner. The werewolf was stable, reliable, and completely free from the supernatural complications that had plagued his relationship with Ashta. He was also undeniably attractive, with the kind of quiet strength that many Omegas found irresistible. His pale hair was bound back in a warrior's knot, and his blue eyes held a gentleness that contrasted sharply with Ashta's fierce intensity. The werewolf's arrival had been planned by the guild as part of their testing protocol. They wanted to see how the reunited pair would handle the presence of a rival, how their newly rekindled connection would hold up under pressure. It was also possible that they genuinely believed Lauren would be a better match for Syrian, a safer choice that would avoid the supernatural complications that had destroyed his previous relationship. Lauren approached the table where Syrian and Ashta stood, his movements careful and non-threatening. He had been briefed on the situation, knew about the history between the two men, and was prepared to handle the delicate dynamics involved. His own interest in Syrian was genuine, not merely a political maneuver or a play for power. Forgive the intrusion, Lauren said, his voice carrying the musical accent of the northern clans. The overseers have asked me to participate in the next phase of the trials. I understand that you are working on the unity potion. The question was directed at both men, but his eyes lingered on Syrian with unmistakable interest. Syrian felt a flush of confusion and something that might have been guilt. Here was a man who could offer him everything he had lost when Ashta left: stability, social standing, a partnership free from curses and supernatural complications. It would be the practical choice, the smart choice, the choice that would ensure his rehabilitation within the magical community. But looking at Lauren, no matter how perfect he might be on paper, Syrian felt nothing. No spark of recognition, no stirring of desire, no sense of rightness or belonging. The werewolf was handsome, kind, and completely wrong for him. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Ashta's reaction to Lauren's presence was immediate and visceral. The demon's eyes flashed with jealousy and possessiveness, and his magical aura flared with protective instincts. He stepped closer to Syrian, his body language clearly marking his territory even as his rational mind recognized that he had no right to make such claims. "The potion is a partner exercise," Ashta said, his voice carefully controlled despite the tumult of emotions beneath. "Perhaps you should find your own assigned partner for the trials." Lauren's smile was patient and understanding, the expression of someone who had dealt with territorial demons before. "Actually, the overseers have indicated that I am to be considered as an alternative partner for Syrian. The guild believes that multiple compatibility tests will provide a more complete picture of potential matches." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Syrian found himself caught between two powerful men, each representing a different path for his future. Ashta offered passion, love, and a history of shared experiences, but also the complications of his curse and the supernatural forces that seemed determined to keep them apart. Lauren offered stability, acceptance, and a chance at a normal life within the magical community, but without the deep connection that had once made Syrian feel complete. The choice should have been easy. Logic dictated that Syrian should choose the safer option, the path that would lead to security and social acceptance. But the heart rarely follows logic, and Syrian's heart had been claimed by the demon years ago. Even 5 years of separation and pain hadn't been enough to break that bond. However, the trials had to continue, and the guild's wishes could not be ignored. The next phase of the competition would test not just magical compatibility but emotional resilience as well. Syrian would have to work with both potential partners, allow the temple's magic to evaluate each pairing, and ultimately make a choice that would determine the course of his future. The testing began with a series of magical exercises designed to gauge compatibility between partners. Syrian first worked with Lauren, and their collaboration was smooth and efficient. The werewolf's magic was steady and grounding, providing a stable foundation for Syrian's more volatile abilities. They completed their assigned tasks with competent professionalism, earning approving nods from the overseers. But there was no fire in their partnership, no spark of true connection. Working with Lauren was like wearing a perfectly tailored but uninspiring garment. It fit well, served its purpose, but failed to inspire passion or excitement. Syrian found himself going through the motions, his heart not fully engaged in the process. When it came time to work with Ashta, the contrast was immediately apparent. Their magic didn't just complement each other. It danced together, creating patterns of power that were both beautiful and devastatingly effective. They completed their tasks with an efficiency that spoke of years of practice, their movements synchronized in ways that suggested a deep, almost telepathic understanding. But their emotional connection was equally intense, and not always in positive ways. The same passion that made their magic so powerful also made them vulnerable to emotional volatility. When they disagreed, their magic reflected that discord, creating unpredictable and sometimes dangerous results. Working with Ashta was like trying to harness lightning, exhilarating when it worked, potentially destructive when it didn't. The overseers watched both pairings with great interest, making detailed notes about compatibility, stability, and potential for long-term success. They seemed particularly fascinated by the intensity of the Syrian-Ashta pairing, even as they acknowledged the risks involved. As the trials continued, Syrian found himself drawn into deeper conversations with both potential partners. Lauren spoke of his clan's territories in the north, of the peaceful life they could build together, of the respect and security that would come with their union. His proposals were practical and appealing, offering everything that Syrian had thought he wanted during his years of exile. But Ashta spoke of dreams and memories, of the life they had built together before fear had torn them apart. He spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying about Syrian's safety, of the weight of the curse that had driven him away, of the love that had never diminished despite the pain of separation. His words were raw and honest, offering no guarantees except the promise of a love that had already survived the worst that fate could throw at it. The emotional testing reached its climax during the ritual of sleep, a ceremony that took place under the influence of lunar magic. Participants were required to spend the night in a magically induced state that would strip away their defenses and reveal their truest selves. It was called the Night Without Masks, and it was designed to reveal the deepest truths about compatibility and connection. Syrian found himself in the temple's sacred chamber, surrounded by crystalline formations that pulsed with soft moonlight. The magic settled over him like a warm blanket, relaxing his conscious defenses and allowing his deepest emotions to surface. In this state, pretense was impossible. He could only be truly himself, vulnerable and open to whatever revelations the night might bring. Ashta was there with him, the demon's usually controlled facade softened by the influence of the lunar magic. In the soft light, he looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the man Syrian had fallen in love with all those years ago. The harsh lines of pain and guilt were smoothed away, revealing the gentle soul beneath the warrior's exterior. It was in this state of perfect honesty that Ashta finally revealed the full truth about his departure. The curse that plagued demons who loved Omegas was not just a matter of troubling visions. It was a progressive condition that would eventually drive the demon to madness, and in that madness, he would become a threat to the very person he loved most. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," Ashta said, his voice soft in the crystalline chamber. "I left because I loved you too much to risk hurting you." The curse was getting stronger, and I could feel my control slipping. I was terrified that one day I would wake up and find that I had become the monster in my own visions. The revelation broke Syrian's heart all over again, but this time it was a healing kind of pain. For 5 years, he had believed that he had somehow failed as a partner, that his love had been insufficient to hold Ashta's interest. Now he understood that the opposite was true. Ashta's love had been so complete, so overwhelming, that he had been willing to sacrifice his own happiness to keep Syrian safe. "You should have told me," Syrian whispered, his hand reaching out to touch Ashta's face. "We could have faced it together. We could have found a way to break the curse, to overcome whatever forces were trying to keep us apart." "I was afraid," Ashta admitted, leaning into the touch. "Afraid that if I told you, you would insist on staying, and I would lose what little control I had left. I thought if I just stayed away long enough, the curse would fade and you would be safe." "And were you right?" Syrian asked. "Did staying away help?" Ashta's smile was sad and rueful.
No.
If anything, it made things worse. The visions became more frequent, more vivid. "I saw you die in 1,000 different ways, and each one felt real. I began to wonder if the curse was punishment for my cowardice, for choosing fear over love." The conversation continued through the night, two souls finally honest with each other after years of misunderstanding and pain. They spoke of their shared past, their individual struggles during their separation, and their fears about the future. By the time dawn broke over the temple, they had rebuilt the foundation of trust that had been shattered by their separation. But the trials were not yet complete. The next phase would test not just their compatibility but their ability to handle external pressures and competing interests. Lauren had not given up his suit, and the guild had their own agenda for the ceremony's outcome. The political implications of Syrian's choice would resonate throughout the magical community, potentially affecting the balance of power between various factions. During the day of decision, the temple's great hall was filled with representatives from every major magical clan and society. The Crystal of Echoes ceremony had evolved beyond a simple compatibility test into a major political event, with Syrian's choice potentially influencing alliances and power structures across the continent. Lauren made his final appeal with dignity and grace, acknowledging the connection between Syrian and Ashta while still maintaining his own suit. "I understand the history between you," he said, addressing both men, "and I respect the bond you share. But love alone is not always enough to overcome the supernatural forces that threaten to tear you apart. I offer stability, safety, and a future free from the complications that have already caused so much pain." It was a compelling argument, and many in the audience nodded in agreement. The practical benefits of a union between Syrian and Lauren were undeniable. It would strengthen ties between the blood carrier mages and the wolf clans, provide Syrian with the social rehabilitation he sought, and avoid the supernatural complications that had destroyed his previous relationship. But when it came time for Syrian to speak, his choice was clear. Standing before the assembled crowd, he looked directly at Ashta, his green eyes bright with unshed tears and determined resolve. "5 years ago, I lost more than just a partner," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. I lost my faith in love, in the possibility that someone could know all of my flaws and weaknesses and still choose to stay. I thought that Ashta's departure was proof that I was somehow insufficient, that my love wasn't strong enough to overcome the obstacles we faced. He paused, gathering his thoughts and his courage. But I was wrong. Love isn't about being perfect or avoiding difficulties. It's about choosing to face those difficulties together, about believing that what you have is worth fighting for. Ashta didn't leave because he stopped loving me. He left because he loved me too much to risk hurting me. And that kind of love is worth any curse, any supernatural threat, any political complication. The hall fell silent as Syrian turned to face Lauren. You are a good man, and you deserve someone who can love you with their whole heart. But my heart belongs to Ashta, and it always has. I'm sorry. Lauren's acceptance was gracious and understanding. I suspected as much, he said with a gentle smile. Your soul was never free to give, was it? It was already claimed, long before I entered the picture. I wish you both happiness, and I hope you find a way to overcome the obstacles that fate has placed in your path. But the ceremony was not yet complete. The guild had their own requirements for the official bonding, and there were still political considerations to address. The archivists stepped forward, their ancient robes rustling with the sound of old secrets and hidden knowledge. The union of Demon and Omega has been forbidden for good reason, the lead archivist intoned. The prophecy speaks of such a pairing bringing imbalance to the magical realms, of chaos and destruction following in their wake. The guild cannot sanction a bond that threatens the stability of our world. But as the words were spoken, something unexpected happened. The temple's magic itself seemed to rebel against the pronouncement, sending ripples of energy through the crystalline walls and causing the very air to shimmer with otherworldly power. The ancient consciousness that dwelt within the temple had been reading the hearts and souls of all present, and it had reached its own conclusions about the truth of the prophecy. Young Luna, who had been among the watchers, stepped forward with the fearless confidence that sometimes comes to those who have not yet learned to doubt their own perceptions. Her words, when she spoke, carried the weight of prophetic truth. The prophecy is false, she declared, her voice ringing through the hall. It was created by those who feared the power of true love, who sought to keep the magical races divided and weak. The union of Demon and Omega doesn't bring chaos. It brings balance. It brings the kind of love that can heal old wounds and bridge ancient divides. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. If the prophecy was false, then the primary justification for keeping Syrian and Ashta apart had been based on a lie. But who had created the false prophecy and why? The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus, the former Void Walker who had found redemption through love and acceptance, stepped forward from the crowd. His presence at the ceremony had been noted but not questioned, his transformation from destroyer to protector having earned him a place among the reformed. I know who created the false prophecy, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had once wielded cosmic power. It was the previous generation of archivists, those who feared that the growing acceptance of cross-species relationships would undermine their control over the magical communities. They manufactured the prophecy to prevent exactly the kind of union we're witnessing today. The current archivists recoiled from the accusation, but the temple's magic had already confirmed the truth of Marcus's words. The crystalline walls pulsed with energy that spoke of ancient lies finally being exposed, of truth overcoming centuries of deception. In the chaos that followed, Ashta made his own declaration. Standing before the assembled crowd, he removed a chain from around his neck. It held a fragment of the bonding amulet he and Syrian had shared, a piece of their original union that he had carried with him through all the years of separation. I never stopped carrying this, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Even when I thought I had to stay away, even when I believed the curse would destroy us both, I couldn't bring myself to let go of the symbol of our bond. If the prophecy was false, if the fears that drove us apart were based on lies, then I choose to reclaim what we lost. He held out the fragment to Syrian, his amber eyes bright with hope and determination. If you'll have me, if you're willing to risk the unknown, Then let's face whatever comes together. No more running. No more hiding. No more choosing fear over love. Syrian took the fragment with trembling hands, feeling the familiar warmth of their shared magic flow through the ancient artifact. The moment their hands touched, the temple's magic responded with a surge of power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Light poured from the fragment, surrounding both men in a cocoon of silver and gold that spoke of a bond that transcended the physical world. But the ceremony had one more surprise in store. As the light faded, a new figure appeared in the center of the hall. This was the temple's own consciousness, manifesting in physical form for the first time in centuries. The being that appeared was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, but something that encompassed all possibilities and none. The temple has made its judgment, the consciousness said, its voice resonating through the hall like a bell. The bond between these two souls is not a threat to the magical realms. It is a promise of balance, of healing, of the kind of love that can overcome any obstacle. The guild's blessing is not required for what the universe itself has already sanctioned. The pronouncement carried the weight of absolute authority, and even the archivists could not argue with the temple's judgment. The ceremony concluded with a spontaneous celebration as the gathered crowd realized they had witnessed something unprecedented. A love story that had overcome lies, fears, and supernatural obstacles to emerge stronger than ever. As the official proceedings wound down, Syrian and Ashta found themselves alone in the chamber where their trials had begun. The illusion of their old home still surrounded them, but now it felt like a promise of the future rather than a painful reminder of the past. "What happens now?" Syrian asked, his hands still intertwined with Ashta's. "The curse is still there. The visions still torment you. How do we move forward when we don't know if we can overcome the supernatural forces that drove us apart?" Ashta's smile was gentle but determined. "We face them together," he said. "We research the curse, we seek out ways to break it, and we refuse to let fear control our lives. If the visions show my death, then we'll find ways to keep you safe. If they show your death, then we'll find ways to change that fate. But we do it together, as partners, as equals." The words were more than just a promise. They were a declaration of war against the forces that had tried to keep them apart. Together, they would face whatever supernatural threats emerged. Together, they would build a new life free from the constraints of false prophecies and manufactured fears. Their first step was to establish a new home, a place where they could work together to understand and overcome the curse that had tormented Ashta for so long. They chose a location at the crossroads of several magical realms, a place where the boundaries between worlds were thin and the possibilities for magical research were endless. The Oracle of Second Chances, as they named their new home, became both sanctuary and laboratory. Ashta used his warrior skills to protect the location from supernatural threats, while Syrian used his magical expertise to conduct research into the nature of curses and the ways they might be broken. Together, they created a place where love could flourish without the interference of outside forces. Their work attracted other couples who had faced similar challenges, beings whose love had been deemed impossible or dangerous by conventional standards. The Oracle became a refuge for those who refused to accept that love should be limited by species, social conventions, or supernatural complications. Years passed, and the Oracle's reputation grew. Syrian and Ashta's success in overcoming their own obstacles inspired others to believe that any barrier could be overcome with sufficient determination and love. They became symbols of hope for those who dared to love beyond the boundaries of the acceptable. Their own relationship continued to evolve and deepen. The curse that had once threatened to tear them apart was eventually broken through a combination of magical research, emotional healing, and the simple power of choosing love over fear. Ashta's visions of death were replaced by dreams of a future filled with possibility and joy. They adopted children who had been rejected by their birth families for being different, creating a new kind of family based on choice rather than blood. Their home became a place where diversity was celebrated, where love was the only requirement for belonging, where the future was always brighter than the past. The story of Syrian and Ashta became legend throughout the magical realms, proof that love could overcome any obstacle, that second chances were always possible, and that the greatest magic of all was the choice to open one's heart to another soul. Their love story, which had begun with rejection and separation, had become a beacon of hope for all who dared to believe in the transformative power of love. As they stood together on the roof of their magical home, watching the stars while overhead in patterns that spoke of infinite possibility, Syrian reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From disgrace and exile to redemption and joy, from separation and pain to unity and love, their story had become something larger than either of them had imagined possible. "We're not playing anymore," Ashta said softly, his arms wrapped around Syrian from behind. "We're real. We're permanent. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." "Yes," Syrian agreed, leaning back into the familiar warmth of his partner's embrace. "We're home." Above them, the stars continued their eternal dance, and the magic that had brought them together continued to weave its patterns through their lives. They had faced the worst that fate could offer and emerged stronger, more united, more committed to each other than ever before. Their love had become a force of nature, as permanent and powerful as the mountains, as endless as the sea, as bright as the stars themselves. The Crystal of Echoes ceremony had been intended as a political spectacle, a chance for the magical community to reassert control over the dangerous forces of love and passion. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a love story that would inspire generations, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, truth over lies, and hope over despair. And in the years that followed, as the oracle of second chances grew and flourished, as more couples found the courage to love beyond conventional boundaries, as the magical realms slowly learned to embrace diversity and change, the story of Syrian and Ashta continued to serve as a reminder that the greatest magic of all was the simple choice to love completely, fearlessly, and forever. Their tale had become more than just a love story. It had become a revolution, a transformation of the very foundations of the magical world, proof that love could indeed change everything. And as they faced the future together, hand in hand, heart to heart, soul to soul, they knew that their greatest adventures were still to come. The temple's ancient consciousness, which had witnessed their trials and blessed their union, continued to watch over them from afar. It had seen many love stories unfold within its crystalline walls, but few had carried the transformative power of Syrian and Ashta's bond. Their love had not only healed their own wounds but had begun to heal the wounds of the entire magical community. In the end, the Crystal of Echoes ceremony had lived up to its name. It had created echoes that would resonate through the magical realms for generations to come, ripples of change that would touch countless lives and transform the very nature of love itself. And at the center of it all, two souls who had dared to love beyond the boundaries of the possible had found their way back to each other and forward into a future bright with promise and possibility. Their story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. For love, true love, is not a destination but a journey, not an ending but a beginning, not a conclusion but an eternal dance of souls who have chosen to face the universe together, come what may. And as Syrian and Ashta stood together under the star-filled sky, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else. Together, united by a love that had proven stronger than any force that had tried to tear them apart. The echoes of their love story would continue to resonate through the magical realms, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of love, the possibility of second chances, and the eternal truth that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful magic of all. Years flowed like water through the halls of the Oracle of Second Chances, each season bringing new couples seeking the same hope that Syrian and Ashta had found in each other. The magical sanctuary they had built together became a beacon for those whose love defied conventional boundaries, a place where the impossible was made possible through understanding, acceptance, and the simple courage to choose love over fear. The Oracle's reputation spread far beyond the borders of any single realm. Demon princes arrived seeking advice on how to love without destroying, their powerful magic contained by the gentle guidance of those who had learned to harness passion without losing control. Elemental beings found solace in the gardens where fire and water danced together in harmony, their opposing natures creating beauty instead of destruction. Shadow creatures emerged from their hidden realms to discover that their darkness could complement light rather than consume it. Each success story added to the oracle's growing legend, but none touched Syrian and Ashta's hearts as deeply as the arrival of a young demon named Kale and his werewolf mate, Finn. The pair had fled their respective clans after their forbidden love was discovered, and they arrived at the oracle's gates bleeding and broken, pursued by forces that demanded their separation. Kale was barely more than a youth by demon standards, his powers still raw and uncontrolled. When strong emotions overtook him, flames would erupt from his skin, and shadows would dance around his form in patterns that spoke of barely contained chaos. His love for Finn was pure and desperate, but it was also dangerous. Already, there had been incidents where his emotional outbursts had nearly killed the werewolf he was trying to protect. Finn, for his part, bore the scars of his clan's attempt to cure him of his unnatural attraction to a demon. Werewolf society was built on pack bonds and traditional mating patterns, and his love for Kale was seen as a corruption that threatened the very foundations of their way of life. He had been subjected to ritual purification ceremonies that had left him weakened and traumatized, his connection to his wolf nature damaged but not destroyed. When they arrived at the oracle, both young men were at the end of their strength. Kale's demon heritage made him a target for any number of supernatural bounty hunters, while Finn's werewolf nature made him vulnerable to the silver-based weapons that his former clan had used against him. They had been running for months, never staying in one place long enough to rest, always looking over their shoulders for the next threat. Syrian and Ashta took them in without hesitation, recognizing in their story echoes of their own past struggles. The oracle's protective wards were strengthened to hide the young couple from their pursuers, and the healing chambers were prepared to address both their physical wounds and the deeper emotional trauma they had endured. The work of healing was slow and delicate. Kale's emotional control had to be rebuilt from the ground up, his raw power channeled into constructive rather than destructive patterns. Syrian worked with him for hours each day, teaching him the meditation techniques and emotional regulation practices that he had learned during his own years of exile. The process was complicated by the fact that Kale's demon heritage made him naturally volatile, his emotions running hotter and deeper than those of most magical beings. Finn's healing was equally complex. The ritual purification his clan had subjected him to had damaged his connection to his wolf nature, leaving him partially severed from the very essence of his being. Ashta, with his warrior's understanding of trauma and recovery, worked patiently to help the young werewolf rebuild his sense of self. The process involved not just magical healing but also psychological work to address the shame and self-doubt that had been instilled in him by his clan's rejection. But perhaps the most important healing happened when the two young men were together. Despite the dangers posed by Kale's uncontrolled power, despite the trauma they had both endured, their love for each other remained pure and strong. When they were together, Kale's flames burned steadier, more controlled, while Finn's wolf nature responded to his mate's presence with a contentment that no amount of clan conditioning could destroy. Watching them together, Syrian was reminded of his own early days with Ashta, when their love had been new and untested, but already showing signs of the profound bond that would sustain them through decades of challenges. There was something about young love that was both fragile and incredibly resilient, capable of surviving pressures that would destroy more mature but less passionate connections. The oracle's other residents rallied around the young couple, offering support and guidance drawn from their own experiences. Marcus, the former Void Walker, shared his insights into the nature of transformation and redemption. Luna, now a powerful healer in her own right, worked with both Kale and Finn to address the magical damage they had sustained. The various couples who had found sanctuary at the Oracle offered their own stories of overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. It was during one of these sharing sessions that Syrian realized how much the Oracle had grown beyond its original purpose. What had begun as a refuge for him and Ashta had evolved into something much larger. A community of souls who had chosen love over convention, who had found strength in their differences rather than despite them. The Oracle had become a place where the future was being written, where new forms of love and partnership were being explored and validated. The transformation was perhaps most visible in the Oracle's physical structure. The original building had been expanded countless times to accommodate new residents and visitors. Gardens had been planted that reflected the diverse magical natures of those who tended them, creating landscapes that shifted and changed with the seasons and the moods of their caretakers. Libraries had been established to preserve the knowledge and wisdom gained from each successful coupling, creating a repository of understanding about love that transcended species and magical traditions. But the most significant change was in the oracle's role within the broader magical community. What had once been seen as a dangerous haven for misfits and outcasts was now recognized as a legitimate institution, one that offered valuable services to the magical realms. Diplomatic missions arrived regularly, seeking mediation for conflicts between different magical species. Young mages came to study the advanced techniques that had been developed for managing cross-species magical interactions. Scholars came to research the nature of love itself, using the oracle's unique environment to explore questions that had puzzled philosophers for millennia. The transformation had not been without its challenges. There were still those who viewed the oracle with suspicion, who saw its acceptance of unconventional relationships as a threat to traditional values. Several attempts had been made to shut down the sanctuary, using legal challenges, political pressure, and even direct magical attack. But each challenge had been met and overcome, strengthening the oracle's position and demonstrating the resilience of the community that had grown around it. One of the most significant challenges came from an unexpected source. The Celestial Council, a group of beings who existed in the uppermost magical realms and rarely concerned themselves with the affairs of lower-dimensional beings. The Council had observed the oracle's growing influence with increasing concern, viewing it as a potential disruption to the cosmic order they were sworn to maintain. The Council's concern was not entirely unreasonable. The oracle's success in facilitating cross-species relationships was indeed changing the fundamental nature of the magical realms. Traditional boundaries between different types of magical beings were blurring, creating new forms of magic and new types of magical creatures. The children born from these unions often possessed abilities that transcended the limitations of their parent species, creating entirely new categories of magical being. The Council's response was to demand a formal review of the oracle's activities, with the stated goal of determining whether the sanctuary's work was compatible with cosmic stability. The review was to be conducted by a tribunal of beings from across the magical spectrum, with the Council reserving the right to shut down the oracle if it was deemed too disruptive to the established order. The news of the impending review sent shockwaves through the oracle's community. Many of the residents had come to the sanctuary specifically to escape the kind of institutional oversight that the Council represented. The thought of having their private lives and relationships subjected to official scrutiny was deeply troubling, particularly for those who had already been rejected by their original communities. Syrian and Ashta called a meeting of all the oracle's residents to discuss their response to the Council's demand. The gathering took place in the oracle's Great Hall, a space that had been designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and magical natures. The room was filled with an incredible diversity of life. Demons sat beside elemental beings, werewolves conversed with shadow creatures, and beings from dimensions that barely intersected with the physical world made their presence known through subtle manipulations of light and energy. The debate that followed was intense and wide-ranging. Some residents advocated for full cooperation with the Council, arguing that the oracle had nothing to hide and that official recognition might actually strengthen their position. Others argued for resistance, claiming that the Council had no right to interfere in the private lives of consenting adults. Still others suggested that the oracle should simply relocate to a realm beyond the Council's jurisdiction, maintaining their independence through isolation. But it was Ashta who provided the perspective that ultimately shaped their response. Standing before the assembled crowd, the demon who had once been driven by fear and doubt now radiated confidence and determination. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of someone who had faced the worst that fate could offer and emerged stronger for the experience. "We have nothing to fear from the Council's review," he said, his amber eyes sweeping across the faces of those he had come to consider family. "What we have built here is not a threat to cosmic order. It is cosmic order in its truest and most beautiful form. We have proven that love can overcome any obstacle, that understanding can bridge any divide, that acceptance can heal any wound. If the Council cannot see the value in what we have accomplished, then the fault lies not with us but with their limited vision." His words sparked a wave of agreement and support from the assembled residents. One by one, they stood to share their own stories of transformation and healing, of love that had overcome seemingly impossible odds, of families that had been built on choice rather than biology. The testimonies were powerful and moving, painting a picture of the Oracle not as a dangerous anomaly but as a beacon of hope for all who dared to love beyond conventional boundaries. The Council's review, when it finally took place, was unlike anything the magical realms had ever witnessed. Representatives from across the cosmic spectrum arrived at the Oracle, beings of such power and majesty that their mere presence caused reality to shimmer and bend around them. They came prepared to find evidence of cosmic disruption, of dangerous magical practices, of relationships that threatened the fundamental order of existence. Instead, they found something that challenged their most basic assumptions about the nature of love and stability. The Oracle's residents presented their case with dignity and grace, demonstrating the strength and permanence of their relationships, the positive impact of their community on the broader magical realms, and the innovative magical techniques they had developed to manage the complexities of cross-species unions. The review process took months, during which the council members lived among the Oracle's residents, observing their daily lives and interactions. What they discovered was a community that was not just stable but actively strengthening the magical realms through its work. The Oracle's research into the nature of love and partnership had produced breakthroughs in magical theory that had applications far beyond romantic relationships. Their techniques for managing conflicting magical energies had proven useful in diplomatic negotiations between hostile species. Their methods for healing emotional trauma had helped countless individuals overcome the wounds of their past. Perhaps most importantly, the Council discovered that the Oracle's disruption of traditional boundaries was actually creating a new form of stability, one based on understanding and acceptance rather than fear and separation. The children born from cross-species unions were not the chaotic anomalies that some had feared, but rather beings who could serve as bridges between different magical communities, facilitating communication and cooperation where none had existed before. The Council's final judgment was unanimous. The Oracle of Second Chances was not a threat to cosmic order, but a vital part of its evolution. The sanctuary was granted official recognition as a legitimate institution, with the right to continue its work without interference from traditional authorities. More than that, the Council recommended that similar institutions be established in other realms, spreading the Oracle's model of love and acceptance throughout the magical cosmos. The vindication was sweet, but it was also bittersweet. The Oracle's residents were proud of what they had accomplished, but they also recognized that their success carried new responsibilities. They were no longer outcasts and misfits hiding from the world's judgment. They were pioneers and leaders, charged with showing others the way forward into a more accepting and inclusive future. For Syrian and Ashta, the Council's recognition marked the end of one chapter of their lives and the beginning of another. They had proven that their love was not only valid but valuable, not only sustainable but beneficial to the broader magical community. The curse that had once threatened to tear them apart had been not just overcome but transformed into a source of strength and wisdom. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came not during the formal ceremonies of recognition, but during a quiet evening when they were alone together in their private chambers. The Oracle was quiet around them, its residents settled into their own peaceful routines, and the magical energies that normally hummed through the sanctuary were calm and stable. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never found each other again?" Syrian asked, his head resting on Ashta's shoulder, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ashta's arms tightened around him, and the demon's voice was soft with contentment. "No," he said simply. "I don't wonder about that because I know it never would have happened. We were meant to find each other, meant to overcome the obstacles that tried to keep us apart, meant to build something beautiful together. The universe itself conspired to bring us back together, and I have faith that it will continue to support us in whatever comes next." "And what do you think comes next?" Syrian asked, turning to look into his partner's amber eyes. Ashta's smile was gentle and full of promise. "More love," he said. "More healing. More couples who need what we can offer. More souls who need to learn that love is stronger than fear. More opportunities to prove that the impossible is just another word for hasn't happened yet." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, the oracle continued its work, providing sanctuary for those who needed it, guidance for those who sought it, and hope for those who had thought it was lost forever. Their love story, which had begun with rejection and separation, had become the foundation for something much larger than either of them had ever imagined. The echoes of their love would continue to resonate through the magical realms for generations to come, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of love, the possibility of second chances, and the eternal truth that love, in all its forms, is indeed the most powerful magic of all.